Hey guys, how you doing? Luna here with a new video. Welcome back to the channel. Today we have a brand new episode of the Versus series where I take two albums, two artists, or two songs and face them off against each other. Today's episode is a little bit of a mismatch. Usually when I try to, when I make these videos, I try to go for picks that make, more sense. For example, Tupac and Biggie, for example, from the rap scene. In terms of pop music, I may go for Michael Jackson and Prince, which is a video you actually have on the channel. One of my favorite videos, by the way. I do recommend for you to check that one out. Maybe Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey, people that belong to the same realm or the same part of music. Instead, today we have John Lennon and Bob Dylan facing off against each other, and I think it's pretty safe to say that even though they have some things in common, for example, the inclusion of politics in their music, the fact that they weren't really the best in terms of vocal ability, and maybe a few folk rock compositions that were kind of similar to each other and even influenced each other, and we'll talk about that later in the video. But overall, I think it's pretty safe to say that they're very different when it comes to their craft as musicians. Another thing people may say is that obviously, as we all know, John Lennon's career was cut short in 1980 because of, his assassination, so we're only going to be counting Bob Dylan's discography up until 1980 as well. As you may or may not know, the way I do these videos and the way I pick my winner is that I go for 4 different categories, that it's popularity, influence, performance, and discography, and based on that, I make my decision. But as always, this is only my personal opinion, so if you have your own, please go ahead and leave it down below in the comments and I'll make sure to check that one out. Now, with that being said, let's go on with the first category. Popularity will always be the first one I go for because in my opinion, it's just the least relevant one. I don't really care how much your album sold. I don't really care how many people know you. The only thing I'm ever gonna give a shit about is the quality of your craft. That's it. That's all I need. However, popularity seems to be kind of a big deal for a lot of people, so I always include it in my videos. And in this case, I think it's pretty safe to say that John Lennon takes the point because John Lennon is not only one of the most popular musicians ever, it's one of the most popular human beings of all time. John Lennon, not only because of his assassination, which was a pretty big deal, but because of his political views, because of his work with the Beatles, the Beatlemania rush in the early 60s, everything added up to John Lennon being one of the most well-known humans of all time. Actually, a lot of people argue that John Lennon in the 60s was way more popular than Michael Jackson in the 90s and 80s, in his prime years. And I believe that even though that's a little bit of an exaggeration, I do believe that John Lennon is known for something more than music. Actually, if you look at the number ones and the top 10s that John Lennon has to offer, the number is not really that impressive. Many other artists that are not even remotely as relevant as John Lennon, like Madonna, Britney Spears, Taylor Swift, fucking Drake, has way more top 10s and number ones than John Lennon. So his popularity when it comes to music wasn't really all that great outside the Beatles. Basically, his success as a peace activist, also his work with the Beatles, and his work as a solo artist made him one of the most well-known humans to ever exist. So he takes the point. When it comes to Bob Dylan was also really popular, especially in the 60s, but nowhere near John Lennon, okay? Maybe if you talk about the early 60s, they were kind of even, but after that, it's just ridiculous to even compare Bob Dylan to John Lennon in terms of popularity. You can go to the other side of the world and people will know who John Lennon is, so he takes the point in this one. Now let's go with influence, which in my opinion is not only more important than popularity, but also way more interesting in this matchup, because both Bob Dylan and John Lennon have been greatly influential in the same particular thing, and that is performance. The greatest contribution that both John Lennon and Bob Dylan ever made for music was basically the style of performing. They both introduced this type of performance that wasn't really based on melody, but more on emotion and more on storytelling, which was really exciting at the time and not really seen that often. Honestly, Bob Dylan seems to be in a better spot in this place because he did it way before John Lennon actually did. Matter of fact, John Lennon was influenced by Bob Dylan in songs like I'm a Loser and You've Got to Hide Your Love Away. This style of performing, it was really melodic, but the core of the song wasn't based on the melody, it was based on the feeling that the performer was trying to portray. However, even though Bob Dylan was way more influential than John Lennon when it comes to performance, John Lennon also participated in other styles of music and was really groundbreaking in those too. For example, psychedelic movement in 1970 with records like Revolver and Sgt. Pepper's. John basically redefined what psychedelic music could do. Also, he introduced songs like Year Blues or Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except for Me and My Monkey, which showed a really raw and aggressive way to perform rock music that wasn't really seen that often at the time. He wasn't the one who invented this sort of music, but was a pioneer when it comes to bringing it out there to the mainstream, and that's definitely adds some points to this category. Overall, I think that it's safe to say that even though John's influence wasn't really that strong in just one particular style of music, it was way more diverse when it comes to Bob Dylan. He focused more on one, which is performance, but he was really, really influential to the point where, in my opinion, his contribution to performance is one of the most important ones in music history, if not the most important one, actually. Therefore, if I'm being honest to myself, and if I want to do this the right way, I have to make this a draw, because, again, Bob Dylan was more influential when it comes to performance, but John Lennon had other ways to influence people, not only with his performance. And yeah, that's pretty much the reason why I'm putting this as a draw. Let's go on with the next one. And the next one will be performance. Now this is really important. If you know me, and if you've seen any other videos in my channel, you know that performance is something crucial when it comes to me enjoying an album. And when it comes to performance, I think that it's fair to say that I'm gonna give this point to no other than Bob Dylan. John Lennon single-handedly crafted some of my favorite performances ever in music, in songs like I Want You, She's So Heavy. What a heavy-ass song. You also have Your Blues, which I love. You have songs like Mother, excellent performance. Then you have tracks like Woman, Just Like Starting Over, excellent performances. John Lennon was never one to criticize when it comes to his ability to perform a track. However, Bob Dylan had such a level of skill that it's almost impossible for me to think of anyone who was able to act, portray, and express his feelings through the music like him. From his early years where his accent was really strong, and then you go to the times where it's changing, where it's obviously a more serious album, a more serious tone, because it's essentially a protest record. Then you go to albums like John Wesley Harding, where he focused more on storytelling. You have Nashville Skyline, him singing in a completely different way. And then you go to the 70s, where he has performances a little bit more aggressive, like Idiot Wind and Hurricane, but also keeping that tenderness in songs like Shelter from the Storm, Buckets of Rain. I mean, amazing. You have a list of amazing performances only in those first 20 years of his career that I think are enough to say that he's one of the best performers of all time. Not only because he was excellent at it, but also because no one else was doing it like him. Literally no one else. There's not a single artist in the 60s or 70s that was performing in the same style that showed such a freewheeling nature as Bob Dylan. So for that reason, in my opinion, and I think it's a pretty safe choice, Bob Dylan is the best performer, not only out of the two, but one of the best performers of all time, definitely, and one of the most influential too. So this point goes to Bob Dylan for sure. Now let's go with the most important category of the video. In my opinion, whoever wins discography wins me. I don't really care if the score says otherwise. Whoever wins discography has already taken my vote as the best artist, because in my opinion, that is just the most important thing. You can have great performers, you can have great musicians, you can have a lot of influence in your career, but if your discography is shit, I don't really care for it. In terms of discography, this is a little bit more difficult because this is where the Beatles play a really big part. Because if you consider the Beatles discography, obviously John Lennon takes the point in this one, because the Beatles have the greatest discography of all time under their belt. And if you, on top of that, add the great albums that John Lennon has as a solo artist, it's a clear win. However, because there are three other musicians, and really talented musicians by the way, included in the Beatles discography, I don't really know if it's fair to use that as, as a valid argument to say that John Lennon had the best discography. So if we only count his solo discography, even if you only take the first 20 years of Bob Dylan's career, you still have Bob Dylan taking the win on this one, because Bob Dylan has some of the greatest albums ever made, multiple of them in this 20 years, and I'm about to name drop a few. So you have The Times Are Changing, The Freewheeling of Bob Dylan, Another Side of Bob Dylan, Bringing It All Back Home, Highway 61 Revisited, Blonde on Blonde, John Wesley Harding, Blood on the Tracks, Desire. How many have I named? All of these records are excellent, and if you want to put the basement tapes in there, you can do it. I think it's kind of unfair because it has the band on there too, so yeah. But even without it, you have such an amazing amount of great records that I think it's not even a discussion, because when you look at John Lennon's discography, you do have amazing albums. Plastic Ono Band, for example, Imagine, Double Fantasy is a really good record too, but that's pretty much where it ends, because when you go to Walls and Bridges and Mind Games and sometime New York City especially, for every good track you have a really bad one or a decent one, and that's not really enough to compete with the level of quality that Bob Dylan was packing at the time. However, again, if you want to put the Beatles in the equation, then it completely changes the whole scenario, because in that case, John Lennon would take the win. So it sort of depends on what you want to do. If you want to take the Beatles material into consideration, then I think it's obvious that John Lennon takes a point, but I personally, I'm not going to do that. Actually, let me put it this way. Let's say we have the best 3 Bob Dylan albums, right? It would be Highway 61 Revisited, Blonde on Blonde, and Blood on the Tracks. Great selection of records. And then let's take 2 of the best solo albums by John Lennon, which would be Plastic Ono Band and Imagine. And then on top of that, we're going to add 1 Beatles album. Let's say it's Revolver, because for many, it's the best one. This is still way better than this. And I know some people may fucking kill me for saying this, but in my opinion, Bob Dylan's discography is undefeated. And that's only counting the first 20 years of Bob Dylan's discography. Dude, if we count every fucking great album that Bob Dylan has ever released, and believe me, there are way more than the one I just named, it's a clear win for Bob Dylan. So Bob Dylan's taken the point, which leads me to my conclusion. And my conclusion is that Bob Dylan is the clear winner out of the 2. I do love John, and I do have a special place in my heart for him, because he participated in my opinion, the greatest band of all time. Not only that, but Plastic Ono Band has a really special place in my heart. But when I'm being honest and when I'm being fair, I can't really say that his career as a musician was better than Bob Dylan's, especially when you look at the amount of work and the consistency that Bob Dylan had in the 60s and 70s. It's really hard to peg John Lennon over Bob Dylan. Obviously, this is only my opinion, so I do want to know what you guys think about this whole thing. I'm really excited to see the comments and, you guys giving me your opinion on John's discography, and especially when it comes to his performance. I think that if I were to change something in this video, it would be the performance category, because it's just so different. They're both so different when it comes to performing music. So I just didn't feel good comparing the 2. I just don't feel like it's a natural thing to do. But overall, I'm really happy with with the way this video turned out. I do believe that Bob Dylan is the better artist out of the 2, especially if you don't take into consideration the Beatle years. So for me, definitely Bob Dylan versus John Lennon. The winner is Bob Dylan. And that will be it for today's video, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed. If you did, go ahead and leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other videos that I upload. Please do remember, as I said multiple times in this video, this is only my personal opinion, so if you have your own, and I'm pretty sure you do, go ahead and leave it down below in the comments so we can have a small conversation, a small debate in the comments section. Doesn't that sound fun? I don't mean any disrespect to John as a musician. Again, if we count the Beatle years, John Lennon is one of my favorite artists of all time. However, I don't think it's really that fair to include the Beatles discography in a conversation where John is supposed to be on its own, standing on its own 2 feet. So yeah, that's pretty much the reason why. So if you disagree, again, leave it down below in the comments. Now, with that being said, once again, I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that I can see you guys soon with a new video. But until then, bye.